At our monthly satsangs, I've been offering a series of messages on prosperous living, on how to thrive in accordance with the soul, our natural capacity to thrive and to experience joy and well-being. This morning's topic in that series is called Taking Charge and Letting Go. Taking charge and letting go. And I wrote, to overcome obstacles in life requires us to be fiercely intentional with our resolve to succeed, to overcome obstacles that we are sure to encounter one time or another, requires us to be fiercely intentional with our resolve, our determination, our commitment, and our focus, and simultaneously to be surrendered to the soul's joy. It's one of those paradoxes of the spiritual path, right? Take charge and let go. Plan for the future and live in the moment. Become skillful at buying and selling in the marketplace and never once forget about God. What does that look like? How do we do that? What is the key to taking charge, to having goals, having aims, committing ourselves, being successful, and being able to let go along the way? What does that look like? How do we do that? It looks like having the courage to have goals and to have aims, but the wider commitment is to the soul's joy. So that as we pursue our goals, we never lose touch with that. Joy of being alive every day as we pursue our goals. That means we plan, we commit, we focus, and we remain unattached to particular outcomes. That's why you have to love the spiritual path, because it's so wild like that. So the teaching that is to be unattached to outcomes does not tell us not to have goals and not to be determined and not to use our will. It's all there. We're supposed to be focused, determined, committed. Get up, do something. But don't lose track of your bliss while you're at it. So, what does that look like? I have this memory that I've had for so many years, really decades, of what that looks like. And if I ever forget what it looks like, I come back to this memory. And it's a good memory for today, because today is the Blessing of the Children Day in our community, and we always can learn from the children, right? They're such great teachers for us. So this was an experience I had of watching a little girl. It's my story of the red-haired girl, the red-haired little girl. I still kind of remember her. And I was spending the afternoon on the beach, and there was a little girl. I can't remember how old she was now. Maybe 3 or 4. Could have been 5 even, I don't know. But she had enough focus and intentionality to be building her castle of sorts, along the shore. And she was quite meticulous with her little shovel and her pail and, building things up. And she was really up to it by herself. She had a vision, she was going for it, and she worked for what seemed to me a very long time for a child at this thing she was making. And I'm watching her, and I'm enjoying watching her creation come into being. And then I also notice that as she has made this creation, she didn't make it too far from the shore where the waves were going to break. And sure enough, after she got it to a sort of recognizable thing that she was really happy with, along comes this wave and just overtakes it and completely destroys it. And I thought, oh no, this is really awful. And this little girl went, yes! She just started to laugh and throw up her hands with absolute delight, with this surprise right in the, she went from one moment of being completely focused on her creative thing and the next moment to simply delighting in the wave that had come and knocked it all down. Now that's a skill. And it's one I think we forget, as we get more and more serious, right? And it's a teaching that Jesus had. We find in the Gospel of Matthew in the 18th chapter, the second verses 2 to 4, and this is where he's having his satsang, and he invites a little child to come forward, and he sets the child there. When the children come in this morning, remember this story, and he says, I'm saying this to you, except you be converted and become as little children, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So there's a little problem with the word converted, and I'm going to get back to that. So I want to just have you listen. And sometimes it's translated also accurately as, except you are changed. Except you change and become as a little child, you're not going to make your way into this kingdom of heaven. For whosoever humbles themselves as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So, first let's deal with that word converted. Because it can be used in a religious context, right? You're converted to a faith tradition. But it's an interesting word. It means to change in form, character, or function. And we get it in our language from Middle English. It has a Latin root. And it means to turn around. Does that sound like yoga for those of you who study? It means to turn around and to send in a different direction. To turn around and to send in a different direction. So, what is he saying in this lesson? He's saying, okay, look, you grown-ups, who are so serious about your spiritual life, about everything in life, unless you learn how to turn your mind around from its narrow focus on what you want and what you're doing, unless you learn how to turn your mind around from that, you're not going to enter the kingdom, which is this higher state of consciousness, which is this awareness of being, awareness of spiritual truth, awareness of your own essence. You lose touch with that when you become overly involved with externals, overly involved with the story in your own mind. So unless you learn how to turn your attention and your awareness. You won't find the doorway into the kingdom of now, into the kingdom of delight. And interestingly enough, we all can do that. We learn, we study of yoga, that our attention and awareness basically moves in two directions. It's kind of like a camera lens, if you think about it, our ability to move our attention and our awareness. And we need both directions. Not that one is bad and the other is good, but one is narrow focus. That's when we're focused on a goal. And then we have the wide lens focus, which is our ability to simply see a bigger picture, our ability to be more fully present in the moment. We have a narrow focus. Often it is about the future or the past. It's about the story, the thinking mind. We're noticing thoughts, we're involved with them, but we also have this ability to turn our attention and our awareness back within and be aware of that which we are, which is, by the way, not the mind. That's Spirituality 101. But we become so involved in our thoughts that we really do identify with the mind. We think we are the mind. And if you're new to meditation, I remember this with meditation, one of the first things you learn is you are not the mind. But after years of believing that you are the mind and the thinking function, it can be really scary, right? You think, well, why would I want to let go of my mind? Then I would just be crazy. But what we don't realize is we are crazy already. What we are is awareness itself. And we can move that lens of our awareness using the mind as an instrument to focus on goals, focus on our thought activity. But we also have the awareness to expand our awareness beyond thought activity. And when we do that, to enter the kingdom. I thought that little redhead girl had entered the kingdom of joy because when the wave came, I don't think she had a story about what she was building and how it was wrong that the wave came. That was my story because I'm an adult, and I was watching. But she taught me in that moment. A beautiful story, beautiful lesson. So meditation, of course, is our primary tool it's our training ground for learning how to turn our attention. If you want to think of it as a lens from narrow to wide. And as I mentioned, one of the first things that we learn in meditation is that we're not the mind. The self is not the mind. That's what our opening prayer is about. Lead us from the unreal to the real. From the darkness of ignorance to the light of truth. From identifying with the changing body and mind to the realization of our divine immortal self. So this week, practice with your awareness camera lens. And notice, if you have become attached to an outcome and the focus has become very narrow, usually what is connected with that is sorrow. And there's the ability then to take a breath, let awareness expand beyond conditions. Because conditions are always changing. They're always going to change. When we don't like them, we're pretty sure they're not going to change. but they do. And more importantly, we do. If we're up to that, if that's our intention. And so this taking charge and letting go is really taking charge in a sense of living the soul life. The nature of the soul is bliss. Nature of the soul is joy. So taking charge is, yes, having goals, having aims, being committed, being determined. But in the midst of that, the deepest commitment is to be in touch with the soul's joy. And to just decide we're not going to lose that along the way. That saying of Jesus, what does it profit a person if they gain the whole world and lose their soul in the process? So we don't want to do that. And the way we avoid that is to be very focused on our goal, but to keep this non-attachment to particular outcomes. So I would say under that is having faith that life is always moving us in a direction of awakening, of fulfillment, of higher purposes. So there's a quote in the Bhagavad Gita that I turn to again and again, and that is in the second chapter, the 40th verse. And that quote says, "On this path, no effort is ever wasted, and no obstacle can long prevail." On this path, no effort is ever wasted, and no obstacle can long prevail. Even a little of this practice saves one from great fear. And I would say, even a little of this practice introduces one to great joy. Even a little. So, what is the practice? That practice is moving our attention and our awareness back to self-remembrance, back to self-knowing, back to being anchored in the self. There is a great distinction between that and self-criticism, which is the story. It's our ability to get out of the story, get back to the self. I'm going to close with a reading from a new book. No obstacle can long prevail on the path of awakening to our full potential. There is no such thing as failure. Not only can no obstacle long prevail on the path of awakening to our full potential, there is no such thing as failure. How can that be? Failure only comes into play when we see success as a final product. True thriving is not a result and does not depend on meeting goals, even though we set them and pursue them with intentionality and with vigor. Living from the inside out, all the way to thriving is thriving. Working towards goals is always in the spirit of learning, growing, awakening, and serving life along the way. Anything and everything that occurs is grist for the mill for thriving in accordance with spiritual principles. Dealing with obstacles is a vibrant part of it. How else would we learn and grow? How else could greater abundance arise without breaking down the limiting barriers of our expectations? The promise that no effort is ever wasted and no obstacle can long prevail do not mean there will be no losses, setbacks, or difficulties. On the contrary, they imply that success always includes them. When we learn how to have a more expansive view of victory, we find that seeming reverses, setbacks, and obstacles are all integral to our highest success. I should leave the final word to Swami Satchidananda, who was quoted probably at Woodstock as saying, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." Namaste.
Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother.
Engrossed is the bee of my mind. Engrossed is the bee of my mind. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind. Engrossed is the bee of my mind. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine mother, my divine mother. Divine mother, my divine. Divine mother, my divine mother. Divine mother, my divine mother. Jai Jai Ma, Durga Ma, Devi Ma, Mama. Engrossed is the bee of my mind. Engrossed is the bee of my mind. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my divine mother. Divine mother, my divine mother. Divine mother.